There is a specific quality of light in Kansas in the late afternoon that does not exist anywhere else. It comes in low and wide across the flatland, and it does not filter through anything. No hills to interrupt it, no significant elevation to catch it from a different angle, and it simply arrives, full and clear, and without drama, the way truth arrives when there is nothing to obstruct it. The farmers who grew up under that light developed a particular relationship with honesty that was not a virtue they cultivated, but a condition of the landscape they lived inside. When there is nothing between you and the horizon in any direction, performance becomes an expensive habit. The Ehlers boys grew up in that light, and it made them in ways that would not fully reveal themselves until a beach in France 20 years later. Junction City, Kansas, 1921. A flat place, an honest place. The kind of place where the horizon is so far away in every direction that a child growing up there develops a particular relationship with distance. Not fear of it, not romance about it, simply a familiarity with the fact that the world extends further than you can see, and that this is normal and requires no special comment. The Ehlers family farmed land outside Junction City during the years when farming in Kansas meant working from before dawn until after dark, and receiving from that work enough to continue, which was itself a form of abundance in the years of the Depression. Walter David Ehlers was born on that farm on May 7, 1921. His brother Roland was born 4 years earlier, in 1917, broader and slightly taller even as a boy, with the same blue-gray eyes and the natural ease of an older brother who has never known a world without a younger brother in it. They grew up doing the same things that farm boys in Kansas during the Depression grew up doing, working before school and after school and all day Saturday and after church on Sunday, learning the specific physical vocabulary of agricultural labor before they learned to read with any fluency, understanding the relationship between effort and outcome in the clearest possible terms, because the farm taught it without metaphor. Roland was the talker between them. Walter was the watcher. Roland decided things, and Walter observed the decision being made and then participated in it fully. And this dynamic, the older brother leading, the younger brother following with total commitment, was so structural to who they both were that neither of them would have been able to describe it if asked, because it was simply the architecture of a thing they live inside.
They worked their uncle's farm. They went to the small local school. They attended the plain white wood-frame church on Sundays, sitting with their family in the same pew every week, listening to the same hymns and the same sermons in the same building that had the same people in it every Sunday of their lives. Their mother, Marie, was a Kansas farm woman of the specific type that the Depression produced in large numbers. Quiet, composed, capable of an enormous range of practical tasks, and possessed of a faith that was not decorative but structural, something she had built her daily life on and that held up under the weight of a depression and 2 sons who were going to do something difficult before long, and who she knew it about before they did. Before Walter enlisted, she asked him to promise her one thing. He asked what it was. She looked him square in the eye and said, "I will only sign on one condition. You promise to be a Christian soldier." He was taken aback. Then he said he would do his very best. He carried that promise with him in his breast pocket, alongside the photograph of her face. And it was in his breast pocket on June 10, 1944, when a bullet entered his back and passed through his pack, and through a bar of soap, and through the photograph of his mother, and through the shovel on his pack, and exited out the front, glancing off his rib. He should have died. He did not. When the medics told him the trajectory, he said he knew. Roland enlisted first, in October 1940. The Selective Service Act meant he was going to be drafted regardless, and Roland preferred to volunteer. Walter was 19 years old. He decided to follow his brother and enlist on the same day. This was not a dramatic decision, and it was not an unthinking one. Walter had been reading the newspapers since 1939. He had been watching what the world was building toward with the specific attention of a farm boy who had learned that the thing coming over the horizon is worth watching carefully, even when it is still a long way off. He knew what was coming. He followed his brother because that is what he had always done, and because following Roland was, in his experience, generally the correct decision, and because the thing that was coming was the kind of thing you wanted to face with your brother beside you, if that was an option. They were assigned together to the 3rd Infantry Division, 30th Infantry Regiment. Walter was trained as a mortarman. Roland was a scout. The assignment suited them. Walter with the technical precision of the mortar. Roland out ahead reading the ground. They trained in the United States through 1940 and 1941. The long months of becoming soldiers in a country that was not yet at war, but was preparing for one with increasing urgency. On December 7, 1941, they were in a barracks common room when the radio brought the news from Pearl Harbor. The room went very quiet. Walter's face went very still. He did not look at Roland. He listened to the radio. Then he looked at Roland. Roland looked at him. Neither of them said anything because nothing needed to be said. They both already knew what this meant and what they were going to do about it, and that they were going to do it together.
Confirmed.
The months between Pearl Harbor and shipping out were months of transformation that happens to young men in armies and that cannot be replicated anywhere else. The gradual, systematic conversion of a civilian body into something that can function under conditions that would break the civilian body it came from. Walter submitted to this process with the focused intensity of someone who understood what it was preparing him for and who intended to be prepared. He was a good soldier from early in training, not because military life was natural to him, but because the farm had given him something that made military competence available. The understanding that work done thoroughly is work done once, that cutting a corner costs more than the corner saved, that the person standing next to you is depending on you to do your part completely, and that this is not optional. The Army was in many ways simply the farm at a larger scale and with different stakes, and Walter had been learning the farm since he was 6 years old. In November 1942, they shipped out for North Africa. This was Walter's first sight of the Atlantic Ocean. He stood at the ship's railing and looked at it with the genuine attention of someone encountering something larger than their entire previous world. Roland stood beside him, slightly more relaxed, because Roland had always been slightly more relaxed than Walter, and because the Atlantic Ocean was simply the next large thing, and Roland had always been comfortable with the next large thing. They saw President Roosevelt review the troops at Casablanca, the president passing at a distance along the formation, while Walter stood at rigid attention and watched him go. A farm boy from Kansas, watching the President of the United States pass by in North Africa in a war. He stored the image the way he stored everything, precisely, without embellishment. The brothers fought together through North Africa, including the battle at El Ghoutar in Tunisia, where their company held off a German panzer unit advance at enormous cost, and then helped push the enemy all the way to the Mediterranean. The fighting in North Africa was the first sustained combat either of them had seen, and it taught them things that training had not taught them and could not have taught them. The specific weight of a decision made under fire, the particular arithmetic of terrain and visibility and timing that becomes automatic only through experience, the way the body adapts to sustained intensity in ways that would not be believable to the person they were before it happened. Both brothers adapted. Walter adapted with the focused intensity of a younger brother who has been trying to keep up with an older brother his entire life and has developed exceptional capacity for adaptation as a result.
In Sicily, in July 1943, Roland was wounded. The wound required evacuation and treatment, and Walter continued with his unit, while Roland was sent back to Africa. This was the first time in 3 years that Walter had been in a situation without Roland nearby, and the absence had a specific weight that he did not discuss with anyone, because discussing it was not something he did. He did his job. He led his men. He wrote letters home to his mother with the careful calibration he had developed for those letters. Enough truth to be honest, arranged carefully enough not to frighten. Roland recovered and rejoined the unit in England in the spring of 1944, and the two brothers were together again, whole, preparing for the thing that everyone in England in the spring of 1944 understood was coming, and that nobody discussed in terms more specific than the next large thing. England in April and May of 1944. The American military camps scattered across the English countryside. Gray sky, muddy training fields, Nissen huts with their curved corrugated iron roofs, bare trees beginning to bud in the English spring. The brothers trained together with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one of the most experienced American divisions in the European theater, the division that had already fought in North Africa and Sicily, and that everyone understood would be going in first at whatever came next. The officers told them that casualties in the upcoming invasion could reach 50%. Walter received this information in the same way he received all information, quietly, without visible reaction, filing it in the part of him that processed the arithmetic of situations and made the adjustments required.
He had been through enough to understand what 50% meant in practice. He made his adjustments. The English pubs near the camp became, on evenings off, a kind of social life that the brothers had not had since Kansas. Ordinary time, a table, 2 pints of English ale, the noise of other people around them, the permission to be temporarily not soldiers. Roland talked. Roland was always the talker. Walter listened and drank slowly, and watched his brother's face with the peripheral attention he had given it since childhood. The attention of a younger brother who was always learned from watching the older one, who was always found in the older brother's face the information about how to feel about the situation they were both in. In England in the spring of 1944, what Roland's face showed was the ease of a man who had decided what he was doing and was at peace with the decision. And Walter's face, reading Roland's face, showed the same peace reflected back. This was, in retrospect, a gift that Roland gave him without knowing he was giving it, the permission to be at peace with what was coming because the older brother was at peace with it. Then came the papers. Walter was transferred from K Company to L Company, promoted to sergeant, designated squad leader. The Army had decided, after the earlier losses of brothers serving together, to separate siblings where possible before the invasion. Walter and Roland would not be going in together. They were going to the same beach, in the same operation, as part of the same division, but in different companies, in different positions on the beach, landing from different craft. They stood outside the administration building with the transfer papers, and Roland read them and said something, and Walter said something, and they stood in the English gray light with the paper that separated them for the first time since Kansas, and then they went back to their respective companies. The night before the final embarkation preparations, they sat outside together on the step of a Nissen hut in the dark English night. They talked, not about the large thing, the way brothers talked the night before something large, which is about everything except the large thing, because the large thing is already understood and talking about it would not change it and would cost something that neither of them wanted to spend. Roland talked, Walter listened. At some point they made the promise, meet you on the beach, meet you on the beach. It was the kind of promise that 2 brothers make who have been meeting each other at agreed points their whole lives, who have been doing things together since before either of them can remember, for whom meeting somewhere is the most natural and ordinary thing in the world. Meet you on the beach. They went inside. They slept.
The morning of June 6, 1944, the English Channel gray and rough in the pre-dawn dark. The Armada, the largest seaborne invasion in history. Thousands of craft on the water, their navigation lights visible in the dark across an enormous area of sea. Walter's LCI, landing craft infantry, moved through the dark channel water toward the coast of Normandy, with his squad aboard and 300 other souls in other craft around them. He sat among his men in the crowded hold and did what he always did, thought about what was coming and what it required and what he would need to do. His face in the dark hold of the LCI is across the channel, the steady face, the face he had been building since North Africa, the face behind which an enormous amount of calculation was happening quietly and continuously. Omaha Beach at dawn, the gray-brown sand, the steep bluffs rising behind the beach, the gray-green channel water between the landing craft and the shore. Walter's craft let him and his squad off in water that was nearly over their heads, and they waded toward the beach holding their rifles above the waterline, the cold of the June Channel immediate and absolute. He moved forward. He did not stop. His squad moved with him because his movement was the direction, and in those first minutes on Omaha Beach, the direction was the most important thing anyone had. He moved across the open beach toward the bluffs. He reached the bluffs. He climbed. He reached the top. He led his squad inland toward their objective, the town of Treviers, 5 miles from the beach. He captured a German pillbox on the way. By the time night fell on June 6th, Walter Ehlers and his squad had made it further inland than almost any other Allied unit that had landed that day. When night fell, he went looking for Roland. He moved through the beach area asking men he encountered. K Company, 18th Regiment, where are they? He followed the directions. He found Roland's platoon sergeant, a veteran soldier, exhausted, his uniform still wet from the landing. He asked about Roland. The platoon sergeant looked at him with the expression of a man who had been asked this question about several men today. He said, missing in action. Walter's face when he heard it was the controlled face of a 22-year-old man trained not to show what he was feeling in front of other soldiers. He thanked the sergeant. He walked back to his squad in the dark. He lay down. He did not sleep quickly. Missing in action. He had seen enough to know what that phrase contained and what range of things it could mean. He put it in the part of him that held things that must be held while other things continued to be done, and he went back to leading his squad through the Norman hedge infantry, field by field and lane by lane, through the specific grinding difficulty of the bocage that no training had fully prepared anyone for. The hedgerows of Normandy, the bocage, were earthen danks 4 to 6 feet high,
topped with dense, tangled root systems and vegetation, forming walls and corridors that turned the Norman countryside into a maze of enclosed lanes, where visibility was measured in meters and every position had to be cleared individually, and there was no such thing as a clear line of sight for more than a few seconds. The fighting in the bocage was the hardest sustained combat of Walter Ayler's war, and that is a sentence that requires a moment to hold, given what his war had contained up to that point. On June 9, 1944, near the small town of Goville, approximately 8 miles inland from Omaha Beach, Walter Ayler's company was pinned down in an open field by fire from German machine gun nests and mortar positions hidden in the hedgerows. Men were pressed flat against the earth. The situation required someone to do something that the situation did not technically require anyone to do. There was no order, there was no assignment. There was only a pinned-down company and a set of German positions that were causing that, and a hedgerow 60 meters away behind which those positions were operating. Walter Aylers raised his head. He saw 4 German scouts moving up from the far side of the hedgerow. He did not wait for an order. He stood up. He moved forward alone toward the scouts.
He killed all 4 of them before they could react. Then he continued toward the machine gun nest behind the hedgerow, a crew of 8 men with a weapon that had been pinning down an entire company, and he approached it from the angle they could not cover, and he put it out of action. He signaled his men to come up. He turned his attention to the 2 mortar pits that were protected by the crossfire of 2 more machine guns, and he led his squad through the fire toward the mortar positions. And before he continued the advance, he gave an order that surprised his men: fix bayonets. Later, he described what happened when the German crews manning the mortars saw an American squad coming through the hedgerows with bayonets fixed. He said their faces looked horrified, and they started running. The mortar positions fell. There was another machine gun nest beyond them. He moved toward it and knocked it out. The company that had been pinned down in the open field was moving again. The next morning, June 10th, the platoon had advanced deep into German-held territory and found itself surrounded, with German forces on 3 sides. A withdrawal was ordered. Walter Aylers understood immediately what an unprotected withdrawal across open ground would cost. He did not wait to be asked. He told his squad to begin the withdrawal and kept himself and his automatic riflemen in the exposed position to provide covering fire. The 2 of them, Walter and 1 other man, stood between the withdrawing platoon and the German positions surrounding them, and fired continuously at a semicircle of enemy emplacements, drawing the fire onto themselves and away from the men crossing the open ground behind them. They moved between positions, never staying still, suppressing one position and then another, keeping the fire directed at themselves. The platoon reached safety. A sniper's round found Walter Aylers while he was doing this. The bullet entered his back, glanced off his rib, and exited out the front of his body, passing through his pack on the way, through the bar of soap wrapped in cloth, through the photograph of his mother, through the shovel. He staggered. He identified the sniper's position. He eliminated it. He looked at his automatic rifleman, also hit, wounded but alive. He picked the man up and carried him across the open ground to where the platoon had withdrawn. He set him down. The medics came. Walter turned back toward the open ground. He had left the Browning automatic rifle, the bar, the squad's most important weapon, at the exposed position when he picked up the wounded man. The squad needed that weapon. He walked back out across the open ground, wounded, to retrieve it. He brought it back. He handed it to the squad. The medics came to him then and assessed the wound and told him he should have been evacuated. And then they told him that based on the bullet's trajectory he should be dead. And he said he knew. And he asked them to dress the wound so he could continue. And they did. And he did. When they removed his pack to treat the wound, they found the photograph of his mother. The bullet had torn through the corner of it. His mother's face still visible through the damage. He held the photograph carefully and put it back in his breast pocket and patted it closed. He refused evacuation. He stayed with his men. He continued leading his squad through the Norman hedgerows through June and into July, wounded twice more before the Normandy campaign ended. Once near St. Lo from aerial bombardment, once in the Herdkin Forest from a mortar shell. 3 Purple Hearts. 3 wounds that required treatment before he returned to his unit each time, because he always returned to his unit. He could not imagine leaving his men, and he did not leave them. On July 14, 1944, more than 5 weeks after D-Day, a senior officer called Walter Aylers to the command post. The commanding officer of Roland's K Company was there. Walter walked into the room. He looked at the K Company commander's face and he already knew. He had known since the night of June 6th, when missing in action had arrived with the weight of a thing that cannot be undone, and he had held it in the part of him that holds things, and kept it there through all June and into July, while he led his squad, and got shot, and carried his rifleman, and retrieved the bar, and got wounded again. He had held it for 38 days. The K Company told him what had happened. Roland had been killed when a mortar round struck the ramp of his landing craft at Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6th. His entire squad died with him. It was immediate. Walter thanked the officer for coming to tell him in person. He saluted. He left the room. He found a private place, behind a farmhouse wall, away from his men, where no one could see him, and he went to pieces. He said so himself, later, in an oral history recorded decades after the war. He said it was the only time during the entire war that he went to pieces. He did not describe what going to pieces looked like. He simply said that was what he did, alone behind the wall. And then he straightened himself and went back to his men and continued the war.
Our Father who art
This is
in
what it
heaven,
cost.
hallowed be
This is
thy
also
name.
what it was built
Thy
on.
kingdom come.
2 Kansas
thy will
brothers
be
who
done.
made a promise on an English coast,
Meet you on the beach.
and one of them kept his
Meet
half,
you on the beach.
and one of them did not make it off the boat. And the one who made it off the boat went through 6 weeks of the most intense,
Meet you on the
sustained
beach.
combat of the war
Meet you on the
without
beach.
knowing what had happened to his brother, carrying missing in action in the part of him that held things that must be held.
Meet you on the beach.
And when he
Meet you on the
finally
beach.
learned the truth, he went behind a farmhouse wall and went to pieces, and then came back and kept going.
Meet you on the beach.
Because
Meet
he
you
was
on the
Walter
beach.
Ehlers,
We're very running.
and keeping going was the thing he had always done. In November 1944, Walter Ehlers was on a train in France, heading back to his unit after treatment for his wound at the Hürtgen Forest. He was reading Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. The soldier beside him saw an article and said, "Hey, I see your brother just got the Medal of Honor." He knew Ehlers only by his last name and knew he had a brother, and so the soldier assumed the Medal of Honor in the newspaper must belong to the brother. Walter looked at the article for a moment.
Funny.
He said,
The mud here is
"Yes,
exactly
I read
the same
that
as
too."
back home. Yeah.
He said to himself, silently, that Roland
air's
certainly
heavier, though.
deserved it. Then he read his
keep
own
thinking
name in the
about Mom's
citation
apple pie.
and understood what was
Yeah.
happening and what was
We'll be
being
back
given
there
to
soon
him
enough.
and what it meant.
We just got to get through tomorrow. Remember that old fishing
He was
spot
presented
down
with
by
the Medal of
creek?
Honor on December
Yeah.
14th, 1944, in
The water's
Paris,
warmer this
by
time of
Lieutenant
year.
General John C. H. Lee. The citation
never
read in
let up.
part, "For
until
conspicuous
August,
gallantry
probably.
and intrepidity at the risk
You
of his
getting
life,
cold?
above and beyond
Nah.
the call of duty."
Just thinking.
It described the events of June 9th and 10th in the
They are
hedgerows
sending
near
you to the
Gauville,
82nd
the 4
Airborne.
scouts,
That means
the machine
Normandy.
gun crew of
I know.
8, the mortar positions,
careful,
the
Roland.
withdrawal, the covering fire, the bullet, the wounded
Looks like they
rifleman
finally
carried
got
to
you, Walt.
safety,
Yeah.
the return for the Bay AR.
Watch your back out there.
It described all of it in the formal language of a
Well,
military
looks like they finally
citation,
got you, kid.
which is a language that converts human
you were bound for the
experience
ninth.
into a sequence of documented actions,
Yes, this is it.
which is useful and
Your
necessary,
transfer papers,
and which
Sergeant.
also,
K
inevitably,
Company to L.
cannot contain what the actions
Thank you,
actually
sir.
cost, or what they were built on. Walter stood at attention while the general pinned the medal to his chest. His face receiving it showed something that the formal language of military
Here are your
citations
orders,
does not
Sergeant
have a term
Ehlers.
for.
You're transferred to
The
L
expression of a
Company,
man
squad leader.
receiving the
Thank
highest
you.
honor his country can give, while understanding that the person who deserved to see him receive it
Casualties,
died at 8 in the morning
50%.
on June 6th when a mortar round struck a landing craft ramp. He carried Roland to the ceremony
I'm
the way
telling
he
you,
carried
Walt, this
everything
ale
about
is
Roland,
better than anything
in the
back
part of him
home.
that held things that
We should
must
open
be
a
held.
pub when we get back.
Present. Weight acknowledged.
Then
Moving
he says
forward
to me,
anyway.
clear as day, that's not my pig.
He was sent home on 30 days leave.
Can you believe the nerve
He
of the
arrived
man?
at the
I
Kansas
nearly choked
farmhouse
on
in
my
December
ale.
1944, and his mother opened the door, and she was older than the photograph, and he was older than anything a photograph could have predicted. And they stood at the door in the
This is
Kansas
my
winter,
solemn promise
and she
to you,
held
my
him,
dearest.
and he held her.
I shall
He had
wait
kept
for
his
you
promise.
until you return to
He had done
England.
his very best to be a Christian soldier,
I promise
and he
I
had come
will
home.
always come back to you.
Roland had not
no
come
matter
home.
where I go.
The Christmas table
And I
had one
promised to
chair
wait
that
for
was
you
not
here.
occupied, and the whole family knew it, and nobody mentioned it, and everyone felt it in exactly the same way, which is the way a family feels an absence that is permanent.
He sat at the table
promise
and
I shall
ate,
return for
and the
you.
chair
And
was
I
in his
shall wait,
peripheral vision,
no matter how
and the
long
Medal
it
of Honor
takes.
was in a case somewhere in the farmhouse, and the damaged photograph of his mother was in his breast pocket, and Roland was in Normandy, and it was Christmas in Kansas. He went to pieces exactly once, behind a farmhouse wall in France in July. He did not go to pieces again at the table in Kansas in December. He sat with it. He ate.
He
was
promises
home.
his mother he will be a Christian soldier.
Before his
as she
leave
asked.
ended, he wrote a letter to the army requesting permission to return to his unit. The Battle of the Bulge was happening. His men were in it. He could not stay in Kansas while his men were in it. The army approved the request. He went back. He led his platoon across the Rhine at Remagen in the spring of 1945. He was wounded a 4th time in April 1945 when a new GI accidentally discharged his rifle and the bullet hit him in the leg and hip. He said later, with the particular dark humor of a man who has been through this calculation multiple times, "The Germans didn't leave much of me untouched." The war in Europe ended in May 1945. He was alive in Germany when it ended.
Look at you,
He
Walter.
stood with his men
I
when the
haven't
news
seen you
came,
eat that fast
and his
since
face was
Salerno.
quiet with the specific quality of a man who has arrived
almost
somewhere
smiled.
and is standing in it.
I swear, This tasted better in
He
Louisiana.
came home to Kansas.
But at least the
He was
view here
24
beats
years
the
old.
swamps, huh?
He had been a soldier for 5 years. He had been in
Remember
3
that time
major
we stole
campaigns
Uncle's
across
prize
2
pig for the
continents.
barbecue?
He had received
Tastes
the Medal
almost
of
as
Honor,
good.
3
Mama
Purple
nearly
Hearts,
skinned us
and a
alive.
Silver Star. He had a
Worth
bullet
it, though.
still in his body that the surgeons decided to
seen the
leave
look on his
because
face
removing
when I
it would
told him
cause
that.
more damage than keeping
He
it.
nearly jumped out of
He
his
moved
boots.
eventually to California. He got a job at the Veterans Administration as a counselor, listening to other men's experiences with the same total attention he gave to terrain in the hedgerows, asking the right questions, being present in the way that he had always been present. He later worked as a security guard at Disneyland. He appeared in a 1955 film called The Long Gray Line, starring Tyrone Power. He was invited to every presidential inauguration from Dwight Eisenhower's onward because of the Medal of Honor, and he went to all of them. He never bragged about any of it. His wife said so, and she would know. The Veterans Administration work was not incidental. Walter Ehlers understood, from the inside, what the men coming back from the war were carrying, because he was carrying it too. And he understood that the carrying was not something that resolved itself through time alone. The men he counseled were men who had done what men in wars do, and had come home to a world that did not have a language for it, a world that wanted them to be fine because the war was over, and fine was the appropriate response to the war being over. Walter knew what fine cost when it was performed rather than felt. He had been performing fine since July 14, 1944, in the Normandy farmhouse outside which he allowed himself, for the only time, not to perform it. He sat across from the younger veterans in the Veterans Administration offices and listened to them with the complete attention that was his most consistent characteristic, and he asked questions, and he did not tell them what to do or how to feel or that time would handle it, because he knew better than that.
Don't you worry,
He was
Walt.
24 and
This
25
scratch is
and 30
nothing.
and 50 years old,
should have
and he
seen
was
the
still
other fella.
carrying
He
June
practically ran all
1944,
the way back
and it
to
did not get
Cairo.
lighter. It simply became more familiar,
just a
and
scratch,
familiar was
Walt.
something you could live inside,
should see
even
the
when
other
light was
fella.
not available.
I'll
The
be
life
back
he
on
built
my
in
feet before
California,
you know it.
the wife, Dorothy, whom he met and married after the
should have
war,
seen the look
the
on the
years at the
medic's
VA,
face.
the years
Thought
at
I was a
Disneyland, and the
goner.
improbable
But
but
look at this,
entirely
Walt,
Walter
barely a
Ehlers' role
scratch.
of security guard
I'll
at
be
the
back
happiest
out there
place on
before you
earth,
know it.
the presidential inaugurations,
scratch,
the
Walt.
speaking engagements at
You should
schools
see
and
the
civic
other guy.
events and patriotic gatherings across
We'll be
50
back in
years of
action
American
before you
life
know it.
was a life built on a foundation that only he could fully see, because the foundation was everything that happened between October 1940 and May 1945, and only he had been inside all of it. He spoke about it when asked, and said what was true, and did not say more than was true, and did not perform any of it. And this consistency, the same words, the same plainness, the same deflection of the metal toward the ones who didn't come home, was itself a form of testimony. The consistency of a man who had decided what the truth was, and had not revised it in 60 years. When people asked about the Medal of Honor, he said the same thing every time. He said, "I wear it for all those who didn't come home." He said it simply, without performance, the way you say a thing that is true, and that you have said many times, and that does not become less true from being said many times. Roland was in it every time he said it. All the others were in it. The men from his squad who survived, and the men from his squad who didn't, and the men from K Company who died with Roland on the ramp, and the men from 100 other units who went into Normandy that morning and did not come out of it. He wore it for all of them. He wore it every time he was asked to wear it, which was often, and he wore it with the medal against his chest, and the damaged photograph of his mother in his pocket, and the weight of what it represented held in the part of him that had learned to hold things across 50 years of living after the war.
He became, in the years after the war, one of the most important advocates for the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. He testified before state officials in Louisiana when the museum needed funding after Hurricane Katrina. The museum's president and CEO said later that Walter's appeal on behalf of the veterans, living and deceased, was perhaps the decisive moment in securing the recovery grant. He did it the way he did everything else, without performance, without self-promotion, saying the thing that needed to be said because it was true and it needed to be said, and he was the one who could say it most effectively. He was good at identifying what needed to be
crossed the
done
ridge here
and then
just
doing
before
it.
sunrise.
He had always been good at
It
that.
should give us cover from Rommel's patrols.
He was the last survivor
And the
of the
supply
12
depot is
American
here.
soldiers who received the Medal of Honor for
We follow
combat
this
in the
wadi
Normandy
line until
campaign.
the crossroads.
9
then
of the
head
12
south.
received it
It should
posthumously.
be clear by then.
Walter Ehlers was one of the 3 who lived to receive it and lived
When did
decades
we get
after.
there?
He lived to be 92 years old.
Depends
He died
on how
on
fast
February
my mother
20,
reads this letter.
2014, in his home in California. The last of the 12, the last man standing from that particular cohort of men who did something extraordinary on the beaches and in the hedgerows of Normandy in June 1944, when the world was being decided, and they were the ones deciding it from the ground level, with their bodies and their weapons and the things they carried in their breast pockets. Roland Ehlers is buried in Normandy, the Normandy American Cemetery at Colvaux-sur-Mer, on the bluff above Omaha Beach. 9,387 Americans are buried there.
the white crosses and stars of David in their precise rows, above the beach where they landed, or above the country they liberated, or simply above the French earth where they fell. Roland is among them, the broad-shouldered older brother from Kansas, who pushed back his helmet slightly in his way and told his younger brother to meet him on the beach, and who died at 8 in the morning when a mortar round struck the ramp of his landing craft before he had a chance to keep that promise.
The state of war exists.
The cemetery sits on the bluff above Omaha Beach, and if you stand in it on a gray June morning and look south toward the beach below, you can see the sand and the water and the bluffs, and the geometry of the place. The open beach, the exposed crossing, the steep bluffs that had to be climbed, the ground beyond the bluffs that had to be taken. The 9,387 crosses and stars are arranged in rows so precise that they appear to extend in multiple directions simultaneously, depending on the angle from which you view them. The effect is of an ordered space containing something that was not ordered in the making of it, and this is the truth of military cemeteries. They impose on the particular chaos of how each person arrived there a uniformity that says something true about what they shared, and something incomplete about who each of them was. Roland Edler's is one cross in those rows. He was 26 years old. He was the talker. He pushed his helmet back slightly in his particular way. He decided to go first, and his younger brother followed him, which was the arrangement, which has always been the arrangement, which is the arrangement that put Walter Edler's on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, doing the thing that eventually produced the Medal of Honor citation, and the damaged photograph, and the train ride in November where he said, "Yes, I read that too," meaning Roland deserved it, meaning the medal belonged to the direction, and Roland had always been the direction.
Walter kept his half. Walter came home. Walter wore the medal for all those who didn't, and said so every time anyone asked, and never said it any other way, because there was no other way to say it that was true. He lived 92 years carrying what he carried, which was the weight of what he survived, and the weight of what Roland did not survive, and the weight of the promise that was kept halfway, and the photograph with the bullet hole through the corner of it, and the bar of soap that stopped a bullet that should have killed him, and did not. He lived 92 years, and he was still the younger brother his whole life. The boy who followed Roland out of the house in Kansas in October 1940, because Roland decided to go, and that was the direction. There is a particular kind of courage that gets written into citations, and recorded in official documents, and put in the formal language that military institutions use to describe the actions of their soldiers. And then there is the kind that does not get written down. The courage of continuing, the courage of carrying missing in action for 38 days without letting it affect the perimeter check or the morning's advance. The courage of going behind a wall and going to pieces, and then straightening and going back to your men. The courage of asking the army to send you back to the bulge from Christmas leave in Kansas because your men are in it, and you cannot be somewhere else while your men are in it. That kind does not have a citation. It does not have a medal. It is simply the shape of a life, the daily accumulated weight of someone who understood what they were responsible for and carried it without complaint for 92 years, from the Kansas farm to North Africa to Sicily, to the English Channel, to Omaha Beach, to the Norman hedgerows, to the Rhine, to California, to every presidential inauguration from Eisenhower onward, wearing the medal for all those who didn't come home, which included his brother, which included the person who decided in October 1940 to go first, and whose decision Walter followed because Roland was the direction.
I've thought this through, and
The
there's no
world
other
that Walter
way.
Ehlers returned to in
We leave
1945
tomorrow, just
was not the
before
world
dawn.
he had left in 1940, and he was not the same person who had left it. And the distance between those two facts, the changed world and the changed man, was the space he had to navigate for the remaining 69 years of his life. He navigated it with the same steady consistency that had characterized everything else. He was not a man who talked about what he carried. He was a man who carried it and did the next thing. The next thing was the VA job, and then the Disneyland job, and then Dorothy, and then the speaking engagements, and then the museum advocacy, and then the inaugurations, and then more speaking engagements at more schools, and more civic events, and more patriotic gatherings. Always saying the same true thing in the same plain way. Always wearing the medal for all those who didn't come home. Always including Roland in that. Always arriving at the end of whatever was asked of him, with the same steady face, and the same quiet refusal to make more of himself than the situation required.
He was asked once at a public event late in his life what he would say to Roland if he could. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd tell him I did my best. I'd tell him I tried to keep my promise." He said it the way he said everything. Simply, without performance, as a statement of fact about what he had done with the half of the promise that remained when the other half became impossible on the morning of June 6, 1944, on the ramp of a landing craft at Omaha Beach.
Brother Miller, mighty
He
fine
promised his
morning,
brother
ain't it?
they would mate on the beach. Roland never made it off the boat. Walter Ehlers lived 92 years with that half of the promise,
carrying it the way he carried everything else, steadily, without performance, all the way to the end. The flat Kansas light was there when he was born, and it was there when he died. And it did not ask what happened in between, which was the thing he had always loved about Kansas light. It was honest enough not to require explanation, and wide enough to hold everything that needed holding without making a particular point of it. Walter Ehlers, Junction City, Kansas, May 7, 1921, February 20th, 2014. He wore it for all those who didn't come home.
Don't tell Ma we didn't finish stacking the south side. Don't tell Ma about that pie we found. I already ate half of it. You should have seen the look of that pig's face when I snuck up on it. Bet you can't eat that whole stack of hay before Pa comes looking for us.